Go in a little bit. I don't want to move the camera anymore. Go there a bit more.
I'm trying to, Dave.
Dude, come on. Seriously. Two more inches. Size of your penis. There you go.
This is such a shit show. Jianggan, I really apologize.
So am I going to see like each of you doing this?
Yep.
And this.
Yep. This will be the fucking weirdest first episode ever.
I mean, we're basically all sitting here watching pornography.
Hello, Barbarians. Welcome to the first recording of the LLB podcast, Low Level Barbarians, a podcast focused on discussing topics from business, tech, startups, investments, economics, society, and more from the Asia region. At the top of the economic ladder are the Barbarians. This podcast is dedicated to you, low-level barbarians looking to level up, or for anyone interested in these topics looking for an Asian perspective. As you heard, the first episode had a rough start, but I promise the discussions won't disappoint. In this episode, we discuss the Grab SPAC IPO, the nature of Chinese antitrust, and the COVID situation in Southeast Asia. Before we get to the topics, I'll cut to the introductions of the Barbarian in Arms, so let's level up. So I'm Alex, your host, typically of EOA, Entrepreneurs of Asia, a podcast focused on talking with founders, investors, entrepreneurs in the Asia region. Rocket Internet, did venture scaling for Easy Taxi and Zalora, did a bunch of bootstrap startups, and do full-time podcasting now. With us, the man of the high ground, Dave Chang.
What's up?
Yep, Dave Chang worked in companies like The Onion in the US, Groupon China, Living Social,
The Onion,
Thinking Casinos.
the Onion?
Yeah, The Onion, the satire.
Like the parody
Okay.
site.
Yes.
Is it by itself or
Holy
satire?
shit, this explains so much about you, know?
Have stories.
Yeah.
Many stories.
He also did a Korean beauty startup called Althea. He's an entrepreneur turned media investor who deploys capital in order to acquire IP. Dave recently moved back to Malaysia, where we're both based, right? Yeah. We have Jianggan Li, the super connector information man who knows everyone and their mother. Born and raised in China, but lived most of his adult life in Singapore. He's the founder and CEO of Momentum Works, which is a venture builder, an intelligence service provider with a corporate learning division. Is that right?
And many more.
And many more things. Jianggan knows literally everyone in the region, probably. He's also ex-Rocket Internet. We did Easy Taxi together. Before that, he was in a media company where he was an editor and an entrepreneur who expanded their business. Lastly, Andrew G. Andrew Gnananantham. Did I say that right?
That's not bad.
Not bad.
Wow.
Andrew G. is the master debater. Previously worked at BCG, who later became the CMO of Lazada Malaysia. And now his favorite question is, what do you do now, Andrew?
Exactly.
So what do you do now, Andrew?
Oh man, I do a bunch of things. I invest in startups, I advise startups, and I do podcasts with Alex when he gets his mic right.
Yeah. Okay, so these guys, they have very strong views. They're not afraid to hold the punches. Each of these guests have done a podcast on the EOA podcast, so you could check out their backstories if you're interested, want to know more. Anything else to add, guys? Or did I miss anything?
That's good.
Okay.
Started.
All right, let's jump into it. The first topic, the Grab SPAC IPO, and what does that mean for the region? So Grab, since 2020, raised over $10 billion from 8 rounds. And they plan on doing a SPAC IPO, right? Which is what the pipe is, 4.4 billion.
Yep.
And then the SPAC itself is $750 million.
500 million.
$500 million. Okay,
yeah.
so I guess I read their deck wrong.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us the context, Dave?
Yeah. I mean, so I have a lot to say about this particular topic, mostly because I was very aggressive on the last episode of EOA about why I don't like this deal.
Oh yeah.
So I mean,
just shot over that.
yeah. So let me allow myself to actually give some insightful analysis on why. And I think there's I mean, the way I look about it, let me take the shit sandwich approach, where I'll say something nice, I'll say a really big part of shit, and then I'll say something nice again. Right. So I think so in general, as a deal, I think like in terms of the deal structuring, this is a super interesting deal vis-a-vis the SPAC component of it, right? What I mean by that is like, if you think about it, traditionally when a company goes public, they probably take anywhere between a 2 to 4% dilution hit that they shouldn't have, because your underwriting bank will typically underwrite the value or underestimate the value of the company to give their institutional investors sort of the pop that they want. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then the trade-off there is because you have like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan underwrite your IPO, you have a better curated public investor base, right? So that's kind of like it's like the rubber stamp to let like the big mutual funds like Fidelity's, the T. Rowe Prices say this is a legitimate organization to invest in, right? And the trade-off, of course, is again, you take in like anywhere between like a 1% to 2% dilution hit, depending on how much of your company you sold during the IPO process. So why I really like this from like a deal structure point of view is Grab has essentially done the best of both, right? So if you look at, so the headline term is this is the biggest SPAC ever. It's actually not, right? The biggest SPAC is, I want to say, like the Churchill SPAC, which is actually a $5 billion SPAC, right? So the way this works is the SPAC is only 500 million, right? Altimeter is putting in another 750 million as part of the pipe, and the rest of the 4.5 billion dollars is coming from the pipe, right? So there's two buckets of capital, right?
And if the pipe is
correct. And if you look at who's in the pipe is like the creme de la creme of public market investors. You have your BlackRock, your Fidelity's, your T. Rowe Price, your Temasek is in there. So actually a lot of the same names that's already on
that would do an
cap
IPO
table.
anyways. Yeah.
Exactly. And so they're all effectively their public float is only like 1% of the total market value of the company. So they're getting best of both, right? So they don't take the dilution hit, but they're still creating like a really curated public investor base, and obviously theoretically it's a faster process. So from that point of view, I think this was like a really well done deal. Right?
really good financial engineering.
There's good financial engineering.
There's a but coming here though.
Yeah. It's shit sandwich, and then the big but, right? I think the big but is like I have a bunch of issues with this company that I'll break down and try and go through succinctly. So number one, right? I think their positioning is disingenuous, right?
So this is Altimeter or Grab?
Grab. Now we're talking about Grab. So we're talking about the actual business itself.
Got it.
I think the deal structure I'm quite comfortable with, right?
Okay.
So the actual deal is their headline is like we're the biggest tech company in Southeast Asia, right?
Right.
So essentially what you're saying is like if you're buying into us, you're taking a bet on Southeast Asia as a region because we compete in all these different verticals.
Yeah.
Right? We're in ride hailing, we're a combination of Uber, Didi, and like a Stripe.
Meituan.
Right? Meituan. Yeah, correct. But I think that's disingenuous because if you actually break it down, right, they're in the markets where they actually have to compete, where there is a well-funded competitor, they're actually not in the number one position, right? So like it's like Indonesia, because that's like the crown jewel of the regions, half the population essentially, and half the value of any business. And there you obviously have Gojek. And I did some research on this platform called NativeX, and on just this pre-merger between Grab and Gojek and GoTo. Yeah. So Gojek actually has 5.7 million MAUs versus Grab's 3. Right, and that's before you include all the transactions that the Tokopedia merger would add in, right? So their market leadership position is far from clear, right? And I think even based off sort of a deck that Jianggan had sent over, right? Like I think ShopeePay has like 10 million paying customers at this point, right? Which actually far outstrips the transaction volume on the Grab platform. So that's number one, right? Their position is very questionable. And number two, the verticals that they compete in are, as we all know, they're like incredibly capital intensive markets, which require a lot of incentive marketing to grow those businesses, right? Ride hailing, food ordering, and basically payments are all incentive driven, right? Like you grow those markets by giving out bonuses and incentives. So then they're not profitable in any of them, right? They say they're profitable in ride hailing, but what a lot of people miss out is they had a $500 million swing in their profit between 2019 and 2020, which is also equal to the discount or the difference in their incentive payouts for drivers. So of course during COVID, you're not going to pay on driver incentives, right? That's it's kind of like a no-brainer, right? So essentially what you have in business is, number one, their leadership position is questionable. Number two, they're burning through cash in all of their core businesses, and they have strong competitors in all these businesses, right? So you have like, obviously in ride hailing, you have GoTo, you have Uber to a certain extent still in like places like Hong Kong, and then you have like local competitors in Vietnam. In food, you have your food pandas, you have your delivery heroes, Shopee's getting into it, and payments, Garena competes in all of these as well, but Garena is huge, and Garena also has a business that makes money, so their cost of capital is eventually going to be much lower. Right. So that's very
as it already is.
As it already is, correct. Yeah, as it already is. You've seen this, right? Yeah. Super questionable. And then the third point is, as I mentioned, I don't like the control structure, the management structure of the deal. Anthony Tan owns 2% of the business post SPAC, and he controls 60% of the voting rights, which is complete control.
How different is that from like Zuckerberg's control of Facebook, though?
Because like, okay, first of all, it's not as disaligned, right? So that's a good point. Zuckerberg owned 20% of Facebook. He still owns 20%, right? And as I mentioned, like this is not a product company. right? Like the argument for Zuckerberg or like the Erics, the Google guys, right, is these are visionary product businesses, and you need that product founder with like the clear vision to drive the business and grow the business. I don't think Grab is that. I mean, Anthony Tan is a storyteller, right?
There's so much to unpack with
let's
that,
unpack
right?
it,
Like,
let's
okay, let me start with the last bit first. Whether a founder has a lot of control or not, like, so I have a lot of respect for Anthony and what he's built, right? In the sense that I think, starting out as a taxi app, and then this was way before we wanted strangers to get into our cars and thought that was an okay thing to do, right? So having the vision to build a taxi app, roll it into a full-blown ride-hailing app, logistics app, then tag on, food now, groceries later, fresh, and then eventually build out the whole universe for payments, right? So let's take a step back here. I think in general, what's happening is in the West, companies that choose to monetize user data tend to monetize it with ads.
Yeah.
In Asia, it's been grow your market share as big as possible, then monetize with loans and additional financial services, right?
Yeah.
So all of them ultimately are playing a similar, like whether you take Garena or Grab or GoTo or like literally everyone who's playing in Southeast Asia is building a database that can be monetizable with financial products, right?
Okay.
If you look at the biggest angel rounds of the last 18 months, right? Bukukas in Indonesia, Ula, they're all building off the same thing as well, right? B2B database that you can monetize with loans. Now, so it's arguable whether or not that's genius of Anthony and these other founders, or is that something that organically happened. But the point is, because the market is evolving so fast, you kind of want to have control so that you can determine the direction of the company. So I'll give you an example. Forrest Lee being able to make the decisions that he can make in Garena to go from a gaming company to a massively losing e-commerce company, and then successfully take it through the last few years, and then now launch food with the second mover advantage that they do in multiple industries. I think that requires control. So it's obviously Forrest didn't give up too much of his equity when he continues to have his voting rights, and in Anthony's case, he built up a war chest. But that's the trade-off he makes, right? So that's like my first position on your thing of
That seems a little bit counterintuitive, because if you're going for a long-term, if you have so much control of such a small stake, there's almost a misalignment there. Because like if there's enough infighting or enough conflict or enough hardship, and all of a sudden you become liquid, and you feel like your effort is not being matched to what you own, right? You have the control to make the change and do all the stuff, but you eventually you find out, like, oh, I feel it's not worth it. You can just leave then, right?
But you wouldn't. That's your baby. It's the biggest thing you've built in your life. Something you want to. It's your empire.
But what's the
right?
Jianggan says one.
What is the point of all this debate about control or not? I mean, if you like the company, you invest in it. If you don't like the company, you don't invest in it. So, I personally don't know what all this fuss is about. Personally, I think I kind of agree with Andrew G, that I think building company to this stage is formidable. So we probably don't know from the outside, but over the years they probably had lots of difficult times, and even if you see the business model, what they are doing now is very different from how they started. So every 2 years I speak with a bunch of guys from China, and they come down and look at the market and say that the dynamics are different. So the companies need to adjust. I just personally don't think that the investors are able to make that decision instead of the founder, because precisely as Dave said, right? I mean, that the market is still far from being settled. So they have leading position in some markets. Indonesia market share is more or less equal, and C is going to some of the spaces that Grab and GoTo are doing. So you never know. I mean, people are asking me that whether the war is over, but it's not over yet. So I do think that you need someone who has strong control. But of course, I mean, back to Alex's point, that whether the same person is eventually going to get tired, or the same person would have that drive to take it to the finishing line, I don't see any other better candidate, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Like, so I guess what you're saying is essentially it doesn't matter. Like, essentially, this is a financially engineered company, and Anthony doesn't matter. It's not going to be a founder-led company, and that doesn't matter for the region.
No, it's founder-led as of now.
That's what he's saying. I'm making the converse at that point,
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I think that's my entire point here is I fully agree. I think like having the ability to quickly make decisions and pivot and make these transitions and autonomy is incredibly important, right? Just to clarify, in terms of Forrest Lee, he owns still, I believe 30%
30 something
of
percent,
Garena, right?
Yeah.
And this is my point, because I'm looking at this in the context of like public markets.
You're like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, also it's like in public markets in the U.S., right? So
Yeah.
the U.S. you have this problem where the CEOs of most large publicly traded companies,
Yeah.
they are basically short-term incentivized by their stock options.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't own enough of the company for them to actually care about the long-term value that the company is driving, right? So like the CEO of all the big Fortune 500, they own like probably less, but somewhere in the approximate ballpark, like around 1 or sub 1%, right? And then you can see that in the way that they drive their companies and how they grow their companies and how they develop, because if I'm being reductive, what they care about is basically how my quarterly performance is, or how my annual performance is, right? And this is for me, like a issue of governance incentives.
Yeah. It's a governance issue, but this is where Jianggan is saying, like, ultimately you vote with your money, right? And if you think a founder-led company makes sense and it's one where they have executive control, I mean, I'm sure there are pieces of this that we're not seeing. Like, for example, I don't know how the IPO deals with Grab's financial arm and its logistics arm separately. I know GFG raised a Series A separately, so that could be like one of the incentives. Like, if you look at Alibaba and Ant, right? At some point, the leadership of Alibaba, in my opinion, had a bit more of a difference to like growing the financial aspects of the company, which were in Ant and the others, as opposed to the e-commerce side of the company, right? And so that could be something that you see over time as well, and that's why you want to have control.
Well, but that's an interesting point, because that was if you remember that particular point in history, that was a big deal when Jack Ma pulled out Ant Financial from Alibaba, right? And the public market. The public market owners of Alibaba took, now besides the whole fiasco with Ant and what's happening, right? Theoretically, that value should have gone to the owners of that stock, right? And they lost out on a significant amount of their upside because he made that move and they had no control, right? And the incentives were off.
And arguably, he made more of his money on Ant than he did from Alibaba.
Yeah.
Oh, he will. Yeah.
Well, that depends.
So correct.
He would or he would have. So depending on how you say it.
Yeah.
Had he kept his mouth shut, he would have.
It might still happen, guys. Come on. But yeah, I'm not sure what the structure of GFG is within Grab and whether it's part of the IPO, but
that's the question.
Yeah,
I also don't know.
Well, I look at it from a different perspective. So Dave kind of looked at it from a top-down perspective, looking at the deal. And the thing, Jianggan, you could help me check, because we were both doing Easy Taxi. And if you look at the long-term viability of Grab, right, it needs to hit profitability, right? It needs to have enough liquidity to fund operations till it hits profitability. There's this redemption risk in the report you sent me, right? That needs to be resolved.
Because of Uber.
I'm not sure the exact share. Yeah.
Most of the investors were convertible.
Yeah.
So basically,
it sounds like DD all over again.
So basically, the last round of funding, and so the new investor had redemption rights if Grab doesn't go for IPO by the 30th of June, 2023. But if Grab goes to IPO, then that problem is resolved.
Yeah, so they have to resolve that. The other thing is, it may take way more money to build out finance than they think, right? The whole incumbent of the financial system is like, do they work together, or they have to invest crazy amounts more money than they actually expected, and then that's going to cause a liquidity problem, right? So this is all from the report that Jianggan sent on from the financial analysis of Grab, right? And essentially Grab in the deck, right? And when you read their deck with Altimeter, they're making a contribution margin argument, right? They're basically saying, if you look at my unit economics, it's very much like Rocket. Like if you scale it to a certain size, eventually we're going to hit profitability once we optimize variable cost, right? But the problem is so the underpinning is rideshare, food, and finance. And I looked at the GMV growth of rideshare, and it's like by this year or next year, it's going to be $8 billion in GMV. And I did a quick napkin math. I'm terrible at math, so you could double check my numbers, right? Assuming every ride is like $5 which is generous in some markets. Like in Vietnam, it's like $3 per ride. Thailand, when I was running it, it was like $3 per ride USD, right? And then so let's just you add Singapore, and maybe you average in long distance riders, you get $5 per ride. That's about $1.6 billion in GMV, which is about 16 million rides per month, averaged across 8 countries. It's an equal distribution. That seemed like a really 16 million rides a month. Do you think when you're running Easy Taxi that you would have done 16 million rides in a month?
Didi does 23 million rides in China a day.
I know, but we're talking about Southeast Asia, right? So essentially, like we looked at like taxi, but so what you're saying is private car plus taxi. They created this whole new category
Correct.
that's just freaking massive, which I find to be very skeptical that without the subsidies, that it's not there. And you see subsidies getting cut, right? So the underpinning of rideshare is very questionable to me, and that network effect really is important for food, right? And once you that kind of weakens from a bottom up perspective, like. That means you have to then start investing into a whole logistics arm. So it gets way more expensive. And it's not the same thing as the US, right? The US where the market is already an incumbent, it's huge. And you're disrupting something that's very profitable already and the margin's on the table, right? You know, you have Uber who has like, you know, taking a new category because it was a real problem. But then, you know, you have food and you putting that together makes a lot of sense.
I think, sorry, so I'm just going to like jump in here. I think this is a very Western way of looking at businesses, right? Like if you look at the history of how tech startups have succeeded in China, India, or now in Southeast Asia, there's a general pattern. So in the States or in Europe, there are these companies that play in very clean verticals or clean horizontals, and they just do that one business and they do that right. Our mistake is looking at Garena as a games company or looking at Grab as just a ride-hailing company. Sure, rides maybe its largest part of the business right now, but think about it, right? Food is a 28% take rate business, right?
15%.
Well, 28% like immediate take rate that you go to the merchant with, and then, you know, minus, you get 15% margin, right? So it's like way healthier as a business than rides. And then if you add on all the other things that you could potentially add on that backbone, right? Whether it's fresh, if it's, I don't know, FMCG products, groceries, Gorilla style. Do you know the company in Berlin? Gorilla is doing 15 minutes deliveries, right? If you tag all these different things out, dark stores, dark, you know, malls and all of this, you end up building a much healthier P&L, right?
Okay, so that's let me finish. So that's that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me finish. I'm a gentleman.
Okay, yeah. So essentially, though, what I'm saying is that is like the theory. I mean, that's the whole thing. My point is the underpinning is very flimsy. Like rideshare is very flimsy on the economics.
Yeah.
And that's important for food. Food, the reason why they focus on food, yes, because it brings cash to the table now earlier and has better margin, right? But the problem is with food, it's also really easy to be competed away.
Can I pause there a second?
Yeah.
It's completely separate businesses. If you look at the kind of people you need and the kind of infrastructure you need for both businesses, for ride sharing, you're using cars mostly in Southeast Asia, right? Even though in Indonesia, it's mostly ojeks, but in the other markets, it's cars, right? For deliveries, your KPI system and the people you hire, your contractors are guys on bikes who need to do 20 to 30 deliveries a day, right? So it's a fundamentally different, like the recruiting and the people you hire are actually very different, right? Yeah. But the people that do food delivery, the guys on their motorcycles, are the ones that can also do fresh, the ones that can also do FMCG. And basically, they start to eat into, think about this, right? How many people go to 7-Eleven to buy cigarettes and a couple of beverages, right? You can eat the market share of 7-Eleven and other modern trade businesses if you move them towards Grab, right? That vision is way larger than growing out ride hailing. So you may be stuck at 16 million, but so what? There's like 15 other things.
I completely agree. So you're building a different business, but the problem with food is way more competitive, right? This is the whole valuation is underpinning on this, right? And I think, you know, then you throw in finance, it's a very questionable, like it. Yes, they have the dominance, but like, you know, it could, I personally think like looking at the numbers and it's just way overvalued, number one. And number two, you know, I think there's going to be a lot more competition that's going to make it harder to, if you get another price war, like, so what's really important is that like, because it's somewhat questionable on the underpinnings of this, I think they do need to IPO and get more liquidity as soon as possible so they can keep printing more money. Right?
Dude, I feel, I can't believe I'm the only one who's like super long on Grab here. So
I told you last time I was very short on that.
Wow, I'm surprised. I actually thought this was like a common feeling. I'm glad that's coming out. But look, look at pure like baseline metrics, right? China has a population of 1.2 billion people. Alibaba's at 350 billion valuation. Meituan is at 140, right? So like you have these multiple, like, what do you call something bigger than decacorns? Centacorns? Whatever they call, right? Like companies pass $100 billion that serve a population that's 2x of Southeast Asia. Why is it that a company getting 40 billion is surprising? Look at C Group, right? C Group is 200 billion today, And it's the only one in Southeast Asia. Why are we surprised if somebody's getting a 40B valuation?
Okay, I want to let Jianggan jump in.
First for C, I'm super long on C, and I actually put on our blog earlier this year saying that the C's market cap is going to reach 200 billion by end of the year. Now it's 150, so it's exactly halfway. So quite happy about it.
Yep.
And then second, I mean, we earlier this week I had a talk with some institutional investors organized by Credit Suisse, and one question which was asked to me was, the tech rate in Southeast Asia is super low. Does it make sense? Because I mean, we think about things from a US perspective, right? Tech rate is how you make money. And Alex, if you remember in early days of taxi, we were doing that in Asia. People talk about tech rate, how much commission you can earn.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example, do you know what's the biggest revenue source of Alibaba?
Advertising.
46%. What?
Yeah.
How about commission? 16%. 16%.
Correct.
So they earn three times as much money in advertising than in the commission for e-commerce.
Correct.
We did number analysis about the e-commerce and different sectors in Southeast Asia, food delivery as well. I think Meituan is also moving quite aggressively towards advertising. So their tech rate is about 11-12%, which they are based on which they are still making a profit. So I do think that in Southeast Asia, you probably see a situation similar to China, where you have lots of merchants, lots of sellers, and especially in e-commerce, you have the Chinese sellers who are used to splashing money to get sales. So I do believe that I mean, tech rate is important, commission level is important, but it's only part of the picture. And at the end of the day, it depends on how big you can make the platform. I mean, how many customers you have, and how are you going to spin the flywheel. So if it's big enough, then you get money for advertising. People will pay you one way or another. So also on the point of competition, I think at the end of the day, I only care about three companies, right? Grab, C, and GoTo. I mean, the other companies are not giant consumer internet companies in region, at least not yet. Unless someone comes in, another SoftBank come in and say, okay, company A, company B, I'm going to give you $2 billion and you're going to compete. I mean, maybe AirAsia, I don't know. Who knows, right? Somebody's going to give them lots of money.
Hey, you guys are laughing. But hey,
but
like,
That's a different topic. Different topic. Let's do that next week. We'll do that next week.
but at the end of the day, it's
this
three big companies competing. Then we just need to look at the dynamics, and if you want to diversify your risk, you invest in all three companies, and if one of them makes it like 50 times, even if the other two completely fail, it doesn't matter to you. So it makes investing much easier, I guess.
Okay, yeah. I think this is, I'm glad you guys all brought this point up, because I think this is fun for me. To wrap up my original point, is the crux of my issue with this entire deal is the value. And I think you asked the right question: is what is the value of this business, right? We can sit here and argue about fundamentals and strategy.
True.
But as a public company, they're comparables. There's opportunity cost, and it's very easy to go get these comparables, right?
Yeah.
So I went through this exercise and I looked at sort of the businesses that Grab is modeling themselves off of. So that would be like an Alibaba, a Tencent, a Garena, to a certain extent Uber, Meituan, right? And so using a really simple metric, Grab's market cap of 40 billion divided by their sales of like 1.6, right? Something like that. It basically gives a ratio of 25 to 1.
Yeah.
Right. So their market cap is 25 times.
25 EV
their
sales.
growth. Yeah, correct. So if you take that metric, multiple, and apply that to the comparison set of Grab's competitors, what do you think Alibaba's is? So again, this is a mature company, dominant player in their market with monopoly profits, right? And profitable, very, very profitable. Yeah. What do you think Alibaba's ratio is?
Still double digit though.
You sure?
Yeah. EV sales?
It's 9. What do you think Tencent is? 10.
10.
Yeah. So the businesses that Grab is modeling itself off of have much lower valuation ratios than what Grab is selling itself at. Even Garena, which is I think for me the closest proxy, because it's in the region, operates in a lot of the same spaces, same vision, right? And similar leadership, Forrest Lee, visionary founder, right? Yeah. Even Garena, which is a profitable company and makes money, is trading at 23.
EV sales.
Yeah. So
that's,
Grab is 25.
Yeah.
So for me as an investor, as a public market investor, right, and I'm sitting here allocating my money and making my bets.
You wouldn't buy Grab.
I wouldn't buy Grab. Yeah. This makes no sense.
So okay, like I'm just going to take a pause here on this, right? Because I'll give you an example of companies that do ridiculous. Roblox, hottest gaming like a stock at the moment, right? It's trading at 36.3x EV sales, right? And most people will say it's a stupid gaming stock to get into, but then like, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, there's two stories to buying a stock. The first is, do you believe in the narrative? Is Roblox building a metaverse? If yes, better get in early before they build a metaverse, right? And so in that sense, like, is Grab building something much larger? Has the fly, like, and do you buy into that story? And is it worth getting in at an expensive price because it's going to keep going up? So that's the first thing. And that's a gut feel you've got to decide. This idea of just buying on EV sales, you wouldn't have bought Tesla either, right? Because EV sales, it was a joke last year. But if you're looking purely as a speculative asset, considering there are very few options in that EV market, it was the only place to buy. There are very few options to buy in Southeast Asia. So Grab would give you a play, obviously overpriced, but it's a play that's going to increase, right? Number one. Number two but number two. So what I'm saying is that commodity is commodity. You want to buy it. If it's expensive, it's gold, but it's going to go up. You buy gold, right? The second bit is about the flywheel effect kicking in, how long it takes to kick in. All the companies you mentioned, right, have had the flywheel effect kick in 10 years ago, right? Grab's really at the initial states. They haven't even started monetization. If you look at ad revenues, like to Jianggan's point, 46% coming from Alibaba. Alibaba had to take years to get there, right? Lazada, Shopee, and not even close to that. Grab is at a minuscule single-digit percent, if I understand it, right? Which means, like, if you kick in ad sales, monetization, all the other things they could do from building a DMP and selling that stuff out, like the amount of money you can make off ancillary products, it's just scratching the surface. So my point is, like, that EV sales number may go down because sales will go up faster than you can think, even though EV stays relatively flat over the first 5 years of them being public. Does that make any sense? So
I can sure.
Yeah. So it may go from 40 to 80 maybe in the first 5 years, but then like sales would grow up way rapidly because more and more retail investors like yourself with higher thresholds for bullshit will say, I'm going to pay 25x, right? I want 12x minimum, and it will slow down. But you get in early, you capitalize on the capital gains in the first 3 to 5 years.
Right. So I disagree with your Tesla analogy because I think in this case there is a very clear.
Do you remember the EV sales when they were at 800?
No, but your argument was saying because Tesla was also the only player in its market or in its business at the time, electric cars, electric vehicles, right? Like as an electric vehicle company, if I wanted to buy exposure to electric vehicles, right, there essentially is only one choice. I have to go buy Tesla.
Nikola, Rivian, you could have.
That's much later.
But right. But yeah, you're right. Let's say I'm making a bet on the region. And that's what Grab is. Grab is a bet on the Southeast Asian region, right? Yeah. And that's the thesis I think we all agree on here. But again, and we've talked about this, if I was going to make a bet on the region, I would much rather bet on something like a Garena or a C, right? Then because this is proven. It's already, they're doing, like I said, it's the same thesis, right? You're making a bet on the region. The business model, their strategy is very similar, right? So
23x, 25x, not that far, bro.
No, come on. Anyone that buys stocks knows that these small percentage points are where your money is made or lost, right? I don't think that's a fair argument. And I think actually just one more point about this. I think also what gets lost, and again, this is going to sound really reductive, but treating Southeast Asia like a single entity is a huge mistake, right? Especially vis-a-vis China context. I'll explain what I'm going to, right? So, and we're going to talk about this maybe later. In China, the way that the CCP is structured and their strategy, it actually behooves them to have 1 or 2 national champions because that allows for them to implement certain level of control. And we're all seeing this now, right? But because Southeast Asia is actually 5 or 6 different countries, right? There's no guarantee that you're going to be the quote unquote national champion in any of those markets, first of all. Like if I was the Indonesian government, right, and I had to choose a national champion to roll out my e-wallet or my e-commerce or whatever, right? I would much rather go with like a homegrown competitor than I would in this case. Singapore, similar to Vietnam, Thailand, for all these markets. So I think the incentives, the regulatory aspect of this, right, and the dynamic between the public-private sector is, I think, something that we can't ignore.
Sorry, I have a point about regulatory incentives. So when you look at China, of course, you talk about CCP. So the incentives of CCP leaders are aligned with the incentives of China as a country. Not necessarily. I mean, the same thing can't be said for lots of countries in Southeast Asia. So,
as a Chinese national, that hurt Jianggan.
That
I'm
hurt.
American now, so I'm
Yeah.
safe.
So I mean, practically, if you think about national champion, but national champion disrupts lots of traditional businesses in the particular nation. So you are going to have lots of pushback there as well, and many of them have friends in the government. So it's not smooth sailing that. That the government will support national champion for sure. I mean, there are people with different incentives. I'm sure these national champions, when they build their businesses in a country, they offend lots of people. I mean, that's the nature of all these disruptors, right? So not necessarily that would translate into a huge advantage for them. I'm not saying anything in particular case, but I'm just saying that in general there could be this possibility. So don't take this as investment advice.
And I would say, like, and to connect what Jianggan is saying to, what Dave, you brought up earlier, this idea of Grab hasn't been able to be successful in Indonesia, but they're in all these other markets. Does it warrant their so-called public view of their success, right? I think this, actually, it's a very interesting point, because South America also has a parallel in where a lot of investors say, if you're not in Brazil, are you really in South America? Right? Because you've got two markets, Mexico and Brazil, that have most of the population, most of the buying power, and then nobody really cares about Chile.
Dude,
Peru,
Mexico's in North America.
Sorry?
Mexico.
True. Sorry. I'm going to say Latin America now. Thanks for the catch. So let's say LATAM. But then I can't speak about Belize. But yeah, sure. Anyways, so I think there's a couple of things, right? First of all these other markets, even though they're small and fragmented, it's hard to win in these markets for the same reasons you said, right? There's internal incentives, politicians, or internal entrepreneurs that they want to push. Vietnam is the most popular for this, right? There's
Thailand
a couple.
too.
Oh,
Thailand as well.
yeah,
Look at the Gojek deal in line and how it's a very different market from.
No, but in terms of like the government propping up local players, like look at like chat apps in Vietnam. It's the local outlets.
Okay, but that was more organic, not really government driven.
Yeah, you can say the same about China, sure. Amazon.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is like, when you have centralized product and tech teams, solid engineering talent sitting down in Singapore, you're able to do things that these local players may suck at. And in asset-heavy businesses, it may be arguable that local players have an advantage, but when it comes to like product, UX, and all the other things that eventually wins markets over time, that's where being able to build into all these markets can benefit you, right? So Grab's already leading in a bunch of markets. Now the question is then, do you warrant, a case of Southeast Asia ex Indonesia and Southeast Asia because what seems to be happening right now is that there's a split where there are certain companies that do really well in Indonesia, and then there's certain companies that do well outside of Indonesia, and there's very little overlap, right? Other than maybe C Group, right? Also arguable, because if you look at how much Shopee is burning in Indonesia, you would want to cry, right? So
It's next topic, right?
Yeah. So the point is, like, I don't know. I think what may end up happening, and you already see it happening in LATAM as an equivalent, right? Like you got Nubank in Brazil, and then like every country has its own like neobank player, and then there's very few like trans LATAM players, right? Rappi is probably the only one who's trying to build like a trans LATAM mega unicorn. And in I think that's happening in every region like ours, where there's these massive fragmentations and big countries that take like a bigger share of the pie. Now, whether or not one player can overcome, I don't think, like my bet is that actually it's like a pseudo fragmented market that continues to persist over time.
Interesting. I mean, I'll make one final point on this before we move on. And I don't discount the belief and story that what Grab is, what Andrew's trying to say. Grab could probably back into this big thing that, could pile on network effects and sell on more things they never thought about, like advertising and whatnot, right? That's possible. But it's largely a function of where we are in the macro picture of how much money there is in the market. There's a bull market going on. Sentiment is flying away and money is flying away. It's an engineered thing. And as soon as like that kind of picture breaks apart and the liquidity dries up, and then starts to be more questionable, where things start to fragment even further.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that it is possible, and that's the bet, right? Now I'm saying, like, the more from rideshare days, from when we started till now, I do use Grab more. So I'm part of the cohort from like 2000 14 whatever, right? Whenever it was, and of course, if you look at the core analysis, your usage gets exponentially bigger.
Yeah.
And of course, then the debate is services and blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, I think it's largely fueled again the underpinnings, right? The fundamentals are not too strong, and it really depends on you clearing that hurdle and needing more money to get there, which is not so clear in my opinion.
So would you buy at the
That's all
IPO?
I'll say.
Would you buy at the IPO? Would you buy at the IPO or would you short?
That's a very good question. Put my money where my mouth is. I'll put more money in C, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and short it.
I'm already.
Dave said he's going to short it. Dave's going to short it.
So let's make this bet. I want to make this bet. Let's put our money where our mouth is,
Yes.
right? So I'm gonna short it, and then let's just
Andrew's gonna buy it.
revisit.
So full disclaimer, I've already put my money where my mouth is.
That's true, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's too late for me to back out. In fact, I'm making these arguments more out of like a belief that I need to because I've already put my money down. But yeah.
But let's
But wait, so Jianggan, I want to hear your thoughts on this like geographical split. Like, this whole point of like you can either win in Indonesia or outside. Do you see like a trans Southeast Asia players becoming stronger over time, or a split? Like, what's your perspective on this?
Personally, I think the trans Southeast Asia players. I mean, it's extremely difficult to make a trans-regional player, but if you manage to do it, and obviously the value is much higher than pure Indonesian player, and if you want to truly make an Indonesian champion, you need to be basically in every aspect of people's life to be able to justify a high valuation because this is going to be a long-term play. So specifically about how do I say about what I would buy Grab, and I think I will wait for 2 quarters at least. I mean, this is something that I'm doing with every stock. I mean, just see what market is taking it. I mean, and of course by 2 quarters you already have some comparable financials that you can look at. So yeah.
He's being diplomatic.
That's very.
He's being diplomatic. He didn't answer your question.
Yeah, well done.
Very smart.
Well
very,
done.
Very well done.
Can you shift the camera so we can see your PR team sitting next to you? Yeah, no, I'm kidding. It's a joke.
But okay, sorry, it's one last thing. Not to be overly negative, though, I do think that this IPO in general is actually very good for the region.
Of course, yeah.
I think in large,
despite the negativity.
Are we all getting politically correct now? Yeah, I do think.
Sandwich. No, yeah, I said sandwich at the start. I said good, a bunch of shit, and then good again, right?
Yes.
So I'm not. No, but I think number one, right? It shows that you can have outsized exits.
Yeah.
Correct.
And also the amount of liquidity that's going to the market from just people cashing out their options. They'll go on to start new companies. They'll become investors themselves. I think overall, this is like an incredible milestone for Southeast Asia as a tech ecosystem.
So congratulations.
Yes, I mean, all my doubts about the business aside, it's a huge achievement. Congratulations, team at Grab. If you see me, don't punch me in the face.
And honestly, like if there's one thing, it's like I always think it's important to do that relationship. If the Flipkarts of the world and the Alibabas of the world can reach the valuations that they have, why do we not have Southeast Asia equivalents that reach similar-ish valuations, sized to the market? We've got 600 million people here. Sure, a bunch of them don't have mobile phones yet, but we're working on that. But why do we say we should limit to 20 billion or 10 billion when these other countries have $350 billion companies?
I agree with you.
Okay.
All right, Jianggan, final thoughts on this before we move on?
No, I think we have covered everything. So no final thoughts.
Okay. I mean, I still think there's more to talk about, but we'll move on.
I think
I spent a long time.
For the sake of the time, right? So let's move to the crackdowns in Chinese tech, antitrust in China and the US.
Favorite topic.
So I'm just gonna leave the room right now because I like to be alive.
No, I mean Jianggan writes, he writes a lot about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Really, Jianggan? Is that why you hide out in Singapore? What's behind Squadcast runs through Chinese servers, right, Jianggan?
It does not.
I have a lot to say.
But recently, right, the Chinese government, the Cyber Administration of China, under the State Information Office, right, since 2020, Alibaba's record fine of 2.8 billion, ByteDance, Meituan, Tencent, Alipay, WeChat, all have been visited by the regulatory bodies. Of course, on one perspective, right, you have the Western media saying this is a Beijing power grab play. on the flip side, if you read other articles, who are actually covering it more nuanced, they're saying there's an actual antitrust issue and worry is it. So what is it to you guys? What's going on here? Is this really real antitrust, or is it what the West is saying?
I will not be the first for this one. No.
Well, I think look, they're not mutually exclusive. First of all,
That's true,
right? So let's go back a few years in Chinese history to when Xi Jinping took power, right? So he came to power in 2010 or something. My dates are always a bit fuzzy, so don't quote me on these things, right? So he came into power, and one of his big first initiatives was this anti-corruption clampdown, right? And these are not mutually, and so again, same sort of story, right? Internally, it was framed as anti-corruption, I'm going to crack down and clean up the party. Externally, it was perceived as sort of a move against its political opponents within China, right? But let's be honest, those are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You can do both, right? And I think in my perspective of this, right, it's a bit of both, right? I think legitimately the CCP does have, in the case of Alibaba and Ant, for sure, right? They had concerns that Ant was becoming, that entity, that group was becoming too powerful, and they wanted to, for the reasons aside, I think that's one, right? But like the motive aside, they did actually want to decrease the power of Ant Financial.
Power in what sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were the biggest consumer lender in China. Okay. I think they were 10% of all consumer loans in China, right? They had
so there's a systemic risk.
Yeah, I mean, and also the way it's structured, it's controlled by like eccentric person who they are not necessarily, well, at the time, right? He was sort of like the golden child of China. He was a poster boy, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of risk there for the CCP. And so then the question then becomes like, okay, right. So how much of that is for sort of like regulatory governance? How much of that's politically motivated? And I think for me, I don't have insight into like the Politburo, CCP. So I don't think I can answer that question. I don't know the people and I don't have the information, but I'm just saying like these two ideas don't have to compete with each other.
Yeah. I mean, even the most nuanced articles I've read, they cover the antitrust parts, as the real reasoning. And of course, but they will always leave this very open-ended, is this element of power an issue that, and of course, you're right. I think if you don't have insights into Politburo, you just can't blindly rail on it and say, it's just all for power grab. And, there's no such thing as a real founder in China, right? Because I don't think that's really the real story or really being fair.
What do you think, Jianggan?
I know you guys are going to point at me at some point of time. So this DD thing was really surprising, right? I mean, lots of people didn't. I mean,
Can you explain the DD thing?
So DD went for IPO very quiet on the 30th of June this year, one day before the centenary of the Communist Party's founding, and of course, on a day nothing happened, and the next day things started, right? I mean, you have the Cyberspace Administration of China making some announcements saying that DD violated some like those cybersecurity and posts on cybersecurity risk. Then you have them taking DD off the shelf and DD app, and then eventually they ordered 24, 25 other apps run by DD, the company. So I think even yesterday there was some reports that the penalty is going to be quite severe. So I'm not sure if you guys heard of this this Word document, which is actually supposedly a meeting note from someone who used to work for the CCP's Department of Propaganda, or now they call Department of Publicity, because they probably realized that propaganda was not a good word. So that guy made some notes, and which he said is what actually happened with the DD episode. So that document became super sensitive in China. So you send this document to a WeChat group, that WeChat group gets disbanded by Tencent. Even some of the groups with very senior government officials get disbanded because it became so sensitive. So essentially what this document said is that so the central government, different departments, even the shareholders of DD, I mean, the Chinese shareholders of DD, Alibaba and Tencent are both shareholders, advised the DD to wait until this thing is clarified. And the DD told the government, and specifically the CSC, that you would consider delaying. I mean, they didn't actually promise, but they said, okay, we would consider delaying that by a few months so that we can talk this thing through. We can make sure there's no risk. And they went ahead anyway. So that, I mean, it's very hard to explain to someone who didn't grow up in China what that actually means. Sort of this lack of political awareness, as we call it literally. So apparently, this sent somebody from the top very, very angry, and that trick.
Do you know why they rushed it? Like, was there any kind of share redemption or something that they were rushing? Because there was a weird 1st July date that they were trying to hit.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they have something similar to Grab. That's much more severe. Maybe they have a rush rate or whatever. I don't know. But there must be a reason why they were rushing for this date. And there's no ceremony.
Yeah,
That's also whatever, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was my question, right? Because this is also in the context of, so this year, for everyone's information, is the 100-year anniversary of the CCP. And the anniversary is like early July. I think it was like July 2nd or 3rd.
First.
I agree with you.
1st of July.
First, yeah, exactly, right? And so I found the timing incredibly questionable as well. So we operate in the media space in China, and media for the last year and a half leading up to the 100-year anniversary has been incredibly sensitive.
Yep.
They banned the most popular TV show, which is called Rap China in China, which is like a rap battle show, because basically the guys had tattoos on the show and it didn't promote good socialist values. So this is a level of sensitivity that's within the country. And so to me, this was a really questionable behavior pattern from Didi's part as well, because you can also consider who's on that board or who's their president. So their president is one by Jing Liu, right? Who is basically Chinese royalty, right? Like her parents, her father, they were on the governing committee. So I'd be curious if you had why did we so tone deaf to the entire thing?
I think let's get a little bit into understanding the so-called royalty, right? I mean, you probably heard back in 2012 when Xi first came to power. There was another guy who was fighting against him, who was also son of some famous revolutionary who used to be the mayor of Dalian. Yeah, Bo Xilai. So
I was in Beijing.
Yeah, so both of them were princelings, and I presume that when we talk about royalty, that's not a single block of unified people, and there's lots of infighting, and
that's true.
And at the end of the day, so if you look at the situation now, clearly that somebody has more power than others.
Yeah.
And
yes, you're right. You're 100% right. There's definitely, it's not a monolithic entity. There are factions within the CCP. Here's my question to you then, Jianggan, right? Like, what kind of message do the recent crackdowns send to Chinese entrepreneurs, right? Like I'll give you something. I'll give you like where I'm coming from, right? So like Jack Ma was removed from Alibaba. The Pinduoduo guy, I can't remember his name, was removed.
Yeah.
The TikTok CEO was recently also replaced, like in May. And it just seems that in my analysis of the viewpoint, it seems that China is essentially going around and CCP, we should differentiate between the two. CCP is going around and removing sort of the best, tech founders and replacing them with, and their backgrounds are always opaque, right? You never know exactly who these people are. But I'm just like, what kind of tone does that set for the ecosystem within China is my question.
I think the analogy, if I could paint a picture, it's almost like the Chinese government wants freshly mown grass as opposed to like free growing tropical forest in your backyard, right? So for them, they're like, capitalism needs to be controlled as opposed to capitalism like unfettered, right? Like, so what they see is probably like, it's probably two things, right? If I take a stab at this, I obviously don't know enough about this area, but like one is that you want to allow companies. So I think the introduction of capitalism from 1972, when they first started opening up borders to now, right, has been about a gradual experiment to see how capitalism can enrich people and enrich lives, but them also putting gentle breaks here and there without any clear breaks. And this is just another variant of the breaks. The truth is, most of us have short-term memories. We're going to forget about this 2 years from now, 3 years from now. What's the name of the Pinduoduo CEO, for example? I don't mean that out of disrespect, but I'm just saying, like, in general, people move on from these things. And in that time, they would have built a structure of breaks and controls, right? And I think that's what's happening. That's the first thing, right? The second thing is, and this is where I get a little bit, I don't know if any of this is true, and I'm just purely hypothesizing, right? As the Chinese government tries to create new interventions, for example, there is a digital currency now coming out, being produced by the Chinese government, right? It'll be the first, Chinese. It's actually the first sovereign digital currency being used by a market at this scale. And on top of that, they want to use it for international trade in future to get other countries to use this and create a new system built up a backbone of Chinese digital currency, right? Now, if you have that, what do you do about WeChat and Alipay, and how do you make them work within that? Right? It's a bit hard. I mean, sure, you can have them as wallets to upload it, or you could control the whole infrastructure. So I think they've basically, it's like go out and play, build some roads. Okay, I like the way you've built this road. I'm going to take over your road and build a nicer road using the way you've built it, right? Which is a pseudo controlistic way of doing. Like it's like an umbrella corp on top of these corporations. They're like, if you think of Google being owned by Alphabet, CCP is like the alphabet in the story, and all the other players that we're talking about are like micro companies being owned by this large umbrella corporation. And they're saying, go out, do your cool startup-y stuff, and when you come back with something cool, hey, I'm just going to take that and apply that, and I control the IP, I control the data, I control how it happens. I don't know. This is me hypothesizing, but that's one general reason. Yeah.
A few pointers from me. First is that, of course, we talk a lot about, I mean, what does this say to entrepreneurs as well as investors? But I think if I'm sitting outside China, and I think the people who should pay most attention to this is regulators, right? I mean, why do they do that at this point in time? And if you look at the crackdown and financial, the 4 agencies came in and started inspection, started all this. I think I had some dealings with some people within these 4 agencies that they wanted to do something on ad for a long time. I mean, this whole Huawei of Alipay having 100 times gearing ratio, that's not allowed for banks. Banks allow what, 10 times, and these guys are running lots of things unchecked, and the regulators are so fragmented, and behind there's lots of vested interest. I mean, some of them are by lots of what you call royalty, the princelings, and not the she part, but lots of princelings are actually behind and so you create a situation where the regulators couldn't act. And without a nod from the top, they couldn't act. So that's why you see when the nod comes, they acted very fast because they had all these things prepared.
What do you mean they couldn't act? Why couldn't the regulators act?
Because they didn't have the power. Because
Interesting.
lots of things, I mean, lots of the things that Ant is doing, I mean, they're not a bank, right? So if they're running a lending service with 100 times gearing ratio with lots of ABS, who should be the party regulating them? Should be the People's Bank of China.
Yeah,
should be the Banking Regulatory Commission. Should it be I don't know, somebody else, Ministry of Finance, whatever. So they had all these issues, and also if you think about what happened in the past few years is Ant basically bought all the media companies in China. So everybody was seeing the sons of Alibaba, and I mean 36KR, the leading tech media in China, Ant is their biggest shareholder, and South China Morning Post is owned by Jack Ma. So all these things, I mean, happening. So it's very difficult for regulators to, I mean, acting alone to say that, okay, hey, what you are doing doesn't make sense, and they'll be facing lots of pressure unless they.
That is such an interesting perspective. Yeah,
It almost fits into your narrative, though. Right?
Yeah.
So that does begs the question, like, there is enough free room to become a really successful hero founder in China. But there is some type of external constraint there.
Sorry, just quickly. I mean, if you look at the whole fintech thing, the whole fintech led in P2P, whatever. So initially, the government was encouraging that, and then it went out of control. Then the government is doing a crackdown that's almost too severe. It basically killed the entire sector. So of course, the natural question is that in the beginning, would it make more sense for you to actually put in some control so that the things will not go wild?
So this is getting like ridiculously philosophical, because you know what? It becomes a whole like who watches the watchers, you know, who guards the guards sort of thing. Like and let me take a step back and explain that, right? So I think if you look at the history of capitalism, there's been all these externalities that happen when you take A and derive B out of it, and you get unintended C. So for example, you take oil out of the ground and we were like, shit, you got cheap oil. This is amazing. Let's power the world. And then now we're like, fuck, global warming. Right. And then, you know, then we have these companies that said, hey, let's figure out ways that people can like and share and connect to each other. And then they were like, oh, wow, data, let's make money with it. And now we're like, fuck, privacy, what about my attention span, etc. Right? And the problem is when we get to the oh fuck point, it's usually too late to do anything about it. Right? And Western liberal democracies don't have the structures required to break these companies. You look at what the antitrust proceedings happening in the US, they're just struggling. You're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping it sticks because they're like, oh, too big to fail. No, wait a minute. But you're actually providing the service for free. So our antitrust regulation doesn't work. So I think what's happening, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being too nice and benevolent to the benevolent dictatorship of China, but it could be that what they're saying is, there's externalities coming. We smell the global warming. We're not really sure how it works. It doesn't fit within our current structure of how we can take you down because we don't even understand this smoke that's coming out, but let's take you down now with whatever we have, and then we'll learn to deal with it, right? So that could be like, you can argue that maybe what they're doing is actually doing some kind of protective. If I take what you're saying, Jianggan, correctly, it's like they're actually trying to protect people from 100x leverage because they can smell the smoke and they know what CO2 looks like, right? Now, that being said, then the counter argument to that is like Western liberal democracies have built a system of checks and balances so that, you know, no one becomes powerful enough to do that. And then through the beauty of everyone doing a little bit of fuck ups all over the place, we kind of find an equilibrium. And the Chinese counter argument to that counter argument is, look at where that's gotten you, the West. Yeah. Look at global warming and look at the shit that you've all found yourself in, right?
My take on this is same shit, different smell. Like, if you really think about the two world superpowers, power will converge. It's just how you want to handle it, right? So I think they're just very similar kind of problems at the end of the day, philosophically speaking, right?
I think there's a third path, decentralization and crypto. But we don't need to get there.
Okay. Before we finish, Dave's final thoughts, then we'll go to the final topic.
Yes.
So,
No, let's go final topic. It's fine.
You want to see what the final topic? Okay. COVID in Southeast Asia. I mean, you guys wanted to. This was your choice.
Do we really want to talk about
this? This was your choice.
I was feeling good about this.
No, Alex. 2 weeks ago we were talking about this topic, and we could still talk about this. But
well, to be fair, 2 weeks ago, I took it very lightly, but it's gotten pretty insane, no?
Yeah, it has.
Like, it's ridiculous how out of control. I mean, like, look, your lives probably haven't changed much, right? Because we're all in a bubble, and we're like, okay.
We're also locked in at home. I haven't been out of my house. This is my first time out of the house in a long time. So.
Yeah.
No wonder you're so chatty.
I know. It's a good thing we have a podcast.
Yeah, so chatty.
But I guess the general update is that, and I've been speaking to as many people around the region because this was brought up, right? And the common theme is that governments have been very slow to react. The Delta variant is out of control, and all the hospitals from Vietnam to Thailand to Malaysia are just overpacked, right? It's like, I see doctors in my elevator who live in my apartment, they're telling me they can't even cope with the situation. It's getting, like 2 weeks ago, I was like, oh, we'll be fine. Another lockdown, whatever. But the more I dig into it, like, you hear about people killing themselves, you hear about people getting depressed, and I think they're like, you don't see it, but it exists there, right? And there is more resurgence of crime and all these kind of problems. So as much, like, I really don't want to talk about this topic, it is still quite present, right?
I mean, like, what is there to say though, right? The only way out of this is just to vaccinate everyone.
Correct.
And move on. I mean, but that's the, you know, I think it's been proven.
Well, and I think Malaysia's not doing a terrible job on that.
I think
front,
Malaysia's doing,
right?
Credit, given where credit's due. I think Malaysia actually is doing a good job with their vaccination rate.
Malaysia has a civil service which actually functions. I mean, you can say that the top is whatever, but the civil service functions.
Well,
no, it does.
Based off the headlines in the past few weeks,
it's questionable.
Who's paying you, Jianggan? No. Who's paying you?
Twice.
Yeah.
The thing is that my wife's Malaysian, so I hear a lot. I mean, from different Malaysians. I mean, you guys seem to be always proud about how fucked up your government is. Whereas if you just talk to any Indonesian, no,
it's not my government. Not my government. The American government is fucked up. Let's be fair.
But we talk to any Indonesian, they will tell you, so what? This is just fact of life. I mean, what are you complaining about?
Okay, that's the Indonesian attitude, but then they are, not only they have the most cases, right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, they are in big trouble too.
Yeah, Jianggan, the problem with that mindset is that's how a lot of Malaysians defend a lot of the shit there. So like,
true.
look,
It's Southeast Asia in general.
in the 1960s, Malaysia had a higher GDP per capita than Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And yet, in the last 50 years, even though we had more natural resources, we somehow managed to squander that lead. And not by like a tiny margin, by several orders of magnitude of a margin, right? And as a result, like that's the problem, right? Like we say, but we're not as bad as Indonesia. Look at Indonesia. Look at Somalia. We're better than Somalia. That's okay. I'd like to be grateful, but unfortunately, we shouldn't have fucked this up. We had everything in control. If you look at our numbers in May, we had things under control. We knew what we were doing, and then some guys decided to just and this was like from the top, right? We didn't buy enough vaccines, number one. Number two, we didn't control people's movements in the States where we should have been. We had a fucking election in November that we shouldn't have had, right? Like, who has an election in the midst of a pandemic?
The US,
right? And a snap election in the poorest state with very little hospital infrastructure. It's like recipe for disaster. Anyways, the point is, I don't want to get into politics here, but like it's like bad decision after bad decision.
Well,
right?
I mean, it's very similar in Thailand too, where they had a social media scandal because they bought too much Sinovac. But then everyone found out Sinovac's not effective, and Delta variant was out of control.
Yeah.
So only this week that the Thai government joined the new COVAX program. Now they're getting access to Moderna.
but they only got it next year, right, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So
Yeah.
I mean, like it feels like the common theme is like Asia's been very slow to react in general, and
In the beginning, that wasn't the case.
Not the case,
People were like, look at Taiwan, look at Hong Kong. Everything was like generally under control.
Taiwan is still okay. Actually.
Taiwan had a spike up in the last 2 months.
100 cases, but back down.
Hong Kong's been managed very well.
So that's my point. Like we've had SARS before. We've had all these other viruses. Like we've had these people in power who ideally need to know better. And honestly, we live in a world where you can pick up the phone and go, Sweden, all right, tell me all about your process.
Yeah.
Right. It was something like, for the first time in the world, we had aliens and zombies. We had something to fight together as a team, And I just think that people just weren't doing 100% what they could have.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question, right? So, do you think that post this crisis, people actually do something, as in they'll actually go out and vote these people out of power? Do you think they'll?
I think what, like, at the very least, what's happened is there's incredible fodder to vote against.
There's a good point. Yeah. Well, I also think that for us, we're in a bubble, but there are people who are really in pain from this.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
I do think that it's possible to have some grassroots movement change. And I was studying the history of Thailand because of this, and they had 23 coups since 1932.
That's just something changed government.
Yeah.
They don't have
They just
that's a bit different.
Okay, but the point is like there's a trigger and an impetus. There's like impetus to this, right?
Yeah.
And change will happen.
But
right. So anytime there's unrest in Thailand, then it starts to the coup happens. Right?
Let me. We're sorry.
I'm a little bit more pessimistic about this, and I think many countries, I mean, the fundamental way that this country is set up is not going to be changed. I mean, look, how many people try to change Afghanistan? I mean, I'm not saying that I'm comparing Southeast Asian countries to Afghanistan, but there are some fundamentals in the countries which are very, very difficult to change. It takes almost a dictatorship over the years to actually build things in place. I mean, Malaysia's civil service was left by the British, right? I mean, so to the beginning of the infrastructure and everything. So, and of course you can vote against the current government, but who do you vote in their place?
That's your point. What's the alternative?
So my point is, like, the alternatives are generally travel, and across Southeast Asia, what's going to happen, actually not even Southeast Asia, just across the globe, right? What's going to happen is there is enough like evidence from the other side that the side that was in power wasn't doing a good job. Right? Very few countries you have people who say, no, my prime minister or my politician did a great job. Because anyone who's lost someone in their family will say, screw you, politicians. Anyone who's lost a job will say the same. Anyone who's lost a business will say the same. The pocket of people that will actually say, actually, it wasn't too bad, is very small in any country.
Yeah,
I fully agree with you, but I think the flip side of this is, like, people, and I think Malaysians in general, have very short-term memory. companies.
Yeah.
Right? Look at Najib. Najib is a great example, right? But like I now see people posting on Facebook, oh, what? We should bring Najib back.
Oh, yeah, that's
How many
Which is
countries
crazy-
is this podcast banned in? Like, I just need to know which airports to avoid for the next 6 months. Yeah, because
I need to leave Malaysia by phone.
yeah.
But
we'll avoid more of the politics stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Also, any friends from Grab, please, like I'll just avoid them.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I can't help you for business.
Yeah, well,
I went on record saying. Yeah. Sorry, Jianggan.
specifically about COVID, did you guys know that China built a wall between at the border with Myanmar, a 500-kilometer wall?
oh wow, I didn't
You
know
build a physical wall.
Yes, they built a wall with
Interesting.
barbed wire, with the surveillance and stuff, because what they realized,
Holy shit! This is World War
No.
Z.
what they realized is that Burma couldn't get their COVID under control because there's no central authority. I mean, different regions are controlled by different warlords. So over if you see over the past half year, every month they would discover cases in Yunnan and brought by people who crossed the border illegally from Burma. So Myanmar, sorry. So they decided to build a wall, and of course, as anything Chinese, they build a wall like pretty quickly. So unlike the one beating US,
It's so ridiculous.
so
It's a Chinese playbook. So it's a Great Wall of Myanmar now.
Yeah.
So
When there's an issue, to build a wall.
Trump should have asked China to build the wall instead of the Mexicans. It probably would have gotten done.
Yeah.
so here's the question. I don't think Myanmar is able to police the border with India, and so that if you look at the situation in Myanmar, if you look at numbers, it's pretty bad. Do you think that Thailand can police the border with Myanmar?
There's no natural border.
Man,
It's very hard.
if you look at the Thai-Myanmar border, just geographically speaking,
Yeah.
it runs across a mountain range, which is quite high. And it's several thousands of kilometers long, right? I don't think it's realistically even possible.
So
I don't think there's much of a geographical border on that side, though.
Thailand, Myanmar,
Thailand,
massive. Shut like just
I thought it was just a forest. That's it.
no. It cuts.
Okay.
Yeah, no. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no border.
yeah,
Yeah,
so-
it's-
so-
it's-
I know that other countries do have mountains, like
So-
that are more insulated, right?
Yeah.
Like, but Vietnam doesn't, right?
Yeah.
On the
So Alex, I've been following the news in Myanmar. So the good thing about WeChat is that you have all these Chinese people like doing business in different places, and they publish news about those places. So I'm following an account which tells me every day what's happening in Myanmar, and almost
the information.
almost every couple of days you hear this kind of news. Some militia is fighting against the army, or some militia is fighting against another militia, and 500 villagers fled into Thailand. In 2 days, it's like some other militia is fighting against some other militia, like 300 villagers went into Thailand. So you see, it's I mean, the whole thing of relying on border control is wrong, because eventually it's not going to solve the problem. But we are in a situation where there are governments who will not put their act together, and in countries where the government even doesn't have control. So what do we do about it? How do we bring things back to normalcy?
Well, I mean, I think, I agree with you, right? And I think that's what I'm saying. Like, the only way out of this is just to basically
Vaccinate. Yeah, exactly.
Everyone in your country,
so the
regardless of
interesting-
origin, right? There's no, and that's, I mean, and you see this in the U.S., right? The U.S. has had a spike of cases, but the death rates are actually still quite manageable because the majority of the population has been vaccinated using either Pfizer or one of the U.S. vaccines.
Well, the other interesting point is that like the countries who have a huge stock of vaccines can use that for diplomacy, right? Like U.S. is sending like 1 million doses per country, but like it doesn't make a big impact, man. Like if you have billions sitting there and no one's using them because they don't want to get vaxxed, send all of them, right? Like
I think this 80 million is the U.S. stockpile at this point. Like they're unused doses of
no, there's more.
Is it more
I mean, I don't know. Okay, this is just through other sources, but they say that billions are sitting on the shelf because of the anti-vaxxers, right? So I don't know, like, you could fact check that, but like, if that's true, they should just send all of that out, right? Like, I mean, like, it would do so much more good in the world.
Okay, let me ask this question. So then, okay, in this context, do you think it's appropriate for the government just to tell everyone to go get your vaccine, whether you want it or not?
I think vaccine should be.
I think so.
Mandatory.
I think so.
It should be mandatory.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
but realistically, lots of governments are not going to do that. So I think a reasonable approach is that you make the lives of those who are not vaccinated increasingly difficult, And you have the
Yeah.
you have the perfect
that's
excuse saying that
too.
because we are doing this because we are protecting you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't get why it should be banned. Look, I understand the philosophical reasons for it, but like so many other vaccines are given to kids.
Yeah, exactly.
At birth,
No one
and it's
questions
mandatory.
anything.
Nobody questions it. Number
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
right? And like we've seen, like take Scandinavian countries where like organ donations is an opt-out as opposed to an opt-in
Yeah.
mechanism, right?
Yeah.
They have the highest rates of organ donation because you don't even know you're on the registry until you're dead, and then
Yeah.
you're, like your kidneys are gone. Right, so it makes more sense to have opt-out systems than
Yeah,
opt-in,
I
right?
agree.
But wait, I want to jump on Jianggan's point here. It's very interesting because if you look outside of COVID, you have a question of like how do we deal with this kind of border immigration at this rate, right? And it's very interesting because Southeast Asia, actually globally, maybe COVID is a test for like things to come.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It's like, I mean, not to belittle what the shitty 2 years it's been, but like, with global warming, with even more aggressive pandemics and whatever else, we have food shortages that we have up ahead. The kinds of problems that you're talking about, Jianggan, is probably going to increase, right? Like, people from Burma crossing over the Thai border when there's flooding on the plains, when there's,
Next topic.
it could be next topic. Yeah, maybe it's segue to the next topic.
Climate change.
Yeah, but like, I think I don't know what the answer is. Like right now, like people estimate that Malaysia has somewhere between 2 to 4 million illegals, right? And it's entirely possible if you look at like if you speak to any friends who own like medium-sized business here and check who they employ, like a bunch of them will be illegals. I'm not ratting anyone out, friends. I'm not naming any names, but you know who you are if you're listening to this podcast. but the point is,
I want to know.
Yeah. The point is, I think these kinds of systems are going to increase, but maybe to like take it to a tech angle, maybe what's needed is systems that get to support them that are quasi-governmental or like supra-governmental, that able to give these people's like livelihoods in the new markets that they enter, right? I don't know. I'm dropping my crypto.
The Balaji.
My Balaji Srinivasan stack.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean that was the whole premise of like the Dreamers program in the U.S. is to give illegal immigrants a path.
Oh yeah,
to
Dream
Yeah,
program.
it was called Dream, right? To become like a path to
Path to
productive-
citizenship.
to be productive citizens
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well, right? So basically, the premise was essentially that if you were the child of an illegal immigrant, if you either went to like a 4-year university or like joined the military, that at the end of that, if you obviously finished it, that you would become, they would grant you citizenship. Right?
So
Or program like that.
that's in a way gamification, right? I mean, just nudge people's behavior based on some rules that you set for them.
Say, come again? What do you
That's
mean?
in a way gamification. So you basically you nudge
Gamification,
people's behavior by a set of like rules and levels that they can follow and they can try to attain.
Which in theory, China has the best controls for that, then I guess.
Speaking of China, did you?
But I think that the question is whether or not there's innovative ways to do this for
true.
illegals as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because like right now, one of the biggest issues like most markets are having is how do you vaccinate illegals, right? In Malaysia, they're just trying to be really nice and say, we won't send your name to the police, just come over.
Yeah, but they're registered then after that.
Yeah, but then you get registered
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah,
So nobody's getting vaccinated, and
Yeah.
it's wildfire. In fact.
I mean, I want to end this on a positive note.
Yeah.
I think we're not a bunch of guys who just hate on everything.
Yeah.
I was positive with that.
I was.
I said it was great for the ecosystem. I said the deal was.
I think I was very positive. I even defended the CCP.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were very
ecstatic
ecstatic
on the
since
CCP.
I said Malaysian politicians are the greatest.
Yeah. What are you talking about? Very nice.
But I think, despite COVID and everything, everyone got their vaccinations. And I don't know, hopefully soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, guys. So I think it's a good first episode.
Nice.
Thank you.
Jianggan, good to meet you, man.
Yeah, good to finally meet you.